Chapter 1. You do not lose yourself because you love. You lose yourself when you forget that love is supposed to make you more alive, not less. This is where Erich Fromm begins to matter so deeply. He does not ask whether you are feeling love. He asks whether you know how to love. That is a very different question. Feeling is not enough. Desire is not enough. Attachment is not enough. Longing is not enough. Even devotion is not enough if it destroys the person who gives it. Fromm understood something that modern life often forgets. Love is not simply a sensation that happens to you. Love is a human power. It is an ability. It is an art. And like any art, it requires practice, discipline, attention, and a willingness to grow. That means love is not only about finding someone. It is about becoming someone who can love without losing integrity. It is about learning how to remain open without becoming empty. It is about learning how to care without controlling. It is about learning how to give without disappearing into the giving. And if you have ever loved in a way that left you smaller, quieter, more anxious, more dependent, or more confused, then you already know how easy it is to confuse love with self-abandonment. That confusion is not your fault, but it is your responsibility to outgrow it. Fromm's work is powerful because he does not flatter us. He does not tell us that love is effortless. He does not tell us that the right person will simply solve the pain of being human. He does not tell us that chemistry is enough. Instead, he reminds us that real love asks more of us than romance ever advertises. It asks for presence. It asks for patience. It asks for responsibility. It asks for respect. It asks for knowledge. And perhaps most importantly, it asks for the courage to remain yourself while opening yourself to another. That is the art. Chapter 2. Modern people are often trained to think of love as an accident. You meet the right person. You feel a spark. You fall. You hope it lasts. But Fromm saw how dangerous that fantasy can be. If love is only something that happens to you, then you remain passive in it. You become a consumer of affection rather than a participant in a living relationship. You wait to be moved. You wait to be completed. You wait to be chosen. You wait for the feeling to arrive and carry you somewhere you could not go on your own. But mature love does not begin there. Mature love begins with character. It begins with the kind of person you are becoming when no one is watching. It begins with your ability to stand alone without becoming closed. It begins with your willingness to know yourself rather than use another person as a substitute for self-knowledge. This is why Fromm's writing remains so uncomfortable and so useful. He exposes the way many of us try to use love to escape our own emptiness. We want someone to fill the gap. We want someone to calm our fear. We want someone to make us feel valuable, seen, chosen, and safe. And while these desires are human, they become destructive when the other person is turned into a remedy instead of a person. That is not love. That is hunger in disguise. And hunger, when untreated, can become possessive, desperate, and blind. To love without losing yourself, you must become aware of where your need ends and where your humanity begins. Need is not shameful, but when need becomes the entire foundation of a relationship, the bond becomes unstable. One person becomes a supplier. The other becomes dependent, and what was called love slowly becomes a transaction. Fromm warns us against this kind of illusion because he knows how easy it is to mistake emotional dependence for depth. But dependence is not depth. It is fear with a romantic face. Chapter 3. One of Fromm's most important insights is that love is active, not passive, not sentimental, not decorative, active. That means love is something you do, not only something you feel. It is a way of being present in the world. It is a practice of attention. It is the repeated choice to understand rather than dominate, to support rather than possess, to see rather than consume. This matters because many people think love is proven by intensity, but intensity can be unstable. They think love is proven by sacrifice, but sacrifice can hide fear. They think love is proven by how much they suffer, but suffering is not the same as commitment. Love is active because it requires daily inner work. It requires the discipline to remain attentive to another human being as they are, not as you need them to be. It requires the patience to let a relationship unfold instead of forcing it into the shape of your anxiety. It requires the courage to care even when care is not guaranteed to return in the form you expected. And it requires something else that modern culture often resists: responsibility. Responsibility in Fromm's sense does not mean ownership or control. It means readiness. It means being available to respond to the reality of another person. It means not hiding behind excuses, fantasy, or emotional laziness. It means not saying, "I love you," while refusing to show up in a way that is real. To love is to remain awake, and waking up is often harder than falling in love. Because waking up asks you to see your patterns. It asks you to notice your selfishness. It asks you to question your illusions. It asks you to become honest about the ways you have tried to use others to avoid your own inner work. That is why Fromm's idea of love is liberating. It removes love from the realm of fantasy and places it back into the realm of character. It says, you can learn this. You can practice this. You can become capable of this, but you cannot fake it forever. Chapter 4. To love without losing yourself, you must understand the difference between possession and care. Possession says, "You are mine." Care says, "I want your growth." Possession says, "Stay close so I can feel secure." Care says, "Stay real so we can both be free." Possession wants control because it is afraid. Care wants truth because it trusts life. Fromm saw that many relationships are corrupted by hidden ownership. People do not always call it ownership, but it is there in the demand to be constantly reassured, constantly prioritized, constantly reflected back. It is there in jealousy that pretends to be devotion. It is there in dependence that pretends to be intimacy. It is there in the need to merge so completely that individuality begins to vanish. But when individuality vanishes, love suffers, because love requires two whole people, not one anxious system and one accommodating body. This is one reason Fromm rejected the shallow image of romantic love as total fusion. Fusion may feel powerful at first, but if it erases difference, it erases the very conditions that make love meaningful. You cannot truly love a person you are trying to possess. You can only control them, fear them, idealize them, or consume them. Real care is different. Real care includes respect for the other person's inner life. It does not reduce them to your emotional needs. It does not require them to be a mirror. It does not demand that they heal your loneliness by becoming a captive of your insecurity. Real care says, "I see you as a living soul, not as a solution." That is a demanding standard. But it is the kind that protects both people, and it is the kind of love that can survive time. Chapter 5. Fromm believed that love begins with the self, but not in the narcissistic sense many people assume. He did not mean self-love as selfishness. He meant the capacity to affirm life without needing to turn every relationship into a rescue mission for the ego. This is a crucial distinction. A person who does not know how to value themselves will often seek someone else to do it for them. A person who does not know how to be alone may use love as anesthesia. A person who has never developed inner steadiness may become emotionally dependent on another's approval. That is not because they are bad. It is because they are unfinished. And Fromm would say that to love another genuinely, you must not hate or neglect yourself. Not because you should become self-absorbed, but because self-contempt turns every relationship into a request for compensation. If I do not value myself, I may ask you to value me enough for both of us. If I do not know myself, I may ask you to define me. If I do not feel whole inside, I may make your presence carry a weight it cannot bear. Then the relationship becomes overburdened with expectations it can never satisfy. This is why self-love matters so much in Fromm's thought. It is not an indulgence. It is a foundation. It is the inner ground that makes respect possible. Without it, love becomes needy, distorted, or parasitic. With it, love can become generous without becoming dependent. And that is the difference between a bond that drains life and a bond that supports it. Chapter 6. One of the simplest ways to lose yourself in love is to stop seeing the other person clearly. Fromm knew that many people do not love real people. They love fantasies. They love projections. They love the image they built from hope, longing, or loneliness. This is why relationships can feel magical in the beginning and unbearable later. The magic was partly real, but it was also partly imagined. You are seeing not only the person in front of you, but the possibility of what they might heal in you. That is a heavy burden to place on another human being. It is also unfair to yourself, because when love is based on projection, disappointment becomes inevitable. The other person cannot remain a fantasy forever. They will make mistakes. They will disappoint you. They will not embody all the qualities your hope assigned to them. And then you must decide whether you can love the actual person or only the idea of them. This is where mature love begins. Begins when fantasy gives way to sight. When you can say, I no longer want to worship an image. I want to know a person. That shift is enormous, because to know a person means to accept that they are limited, incomplete, and separate from your imagination. It means to honor their reality instead of using them as a screen for your need. It means to stay with the truth, even when the truth is less dramatic than the dream. Fromm would say that this is not a loss of love. It is the beginning of real love. Because only reality can sustain love. Fantasy always asks for collapse. Reality asks for effort. And effort, when joined with respect and care, becomes the home where love can live. Chapter 7. If you keep losing yourself in relationships, Fromm would not ask first, why do they not love you enough? He would ask, what kind of love are you trying to buy with your own disappearance? That is the painful question, because self-loss often hides inside devotion. You give too much. You forgive too quickly. You become too flexible. You adapt to what hurts you. You shrink around what should be mutual. And eventually you call it love because the alternative feels like abandonment. But love that requires you to vanish is not love that nourishes your life. Fromm repeatedly emphasized that love involves care, responsibility, respect, and knowledge. Notice that none of these require self-erasure. Care means I seek your good. Responsibility means I am ready to respond to your reality. Respect means I see you as you are. Knowledge means I try to understand you deeply. None of this demands that I become less myself. In fact, if I lose myself, I cannot truly care for you either, because I will be relating from emptiness, not fullness. This is one of the most valuable truths in Fromm's work. A healthy love is not a collapse of two identities into one blur. It is a meeting between two people who have each done enough inner work to remain present. That does not make love easy. It makes love real. And real love is not fragile in the way fantasy is fragile. It does not need constant reassurance to exist. It does not need possession to survive. It does not need you to forget yourself in order to feel close. It needs honesty. It needs structure. It needs the courage to remain separate and connected at the same time. That balance is difficult, but it is exactly what protects you from losing yourself in the very thing you hoped would save you. Chapter 8. There is a modern misunderstanding that Fromm would likely challenge strongly. The idea that love is primarily about satisfaction. People often ask whether they are fulfilled in a relationship, whether their needs are met, whether they feel enough passion, enough attention, enough certainty, enough validation. These are understandable questions, but if they are all you ask, the relationship becomes a consumer experience. Fromm saw that modern life trains people to think in terms of exchange, utility, and fulfillment of desire. That mentality can infiltrate love very easily. What do I get? How do I feel? What can this person do for me? How do I know it's worth it? But if love is reduced to satisfaction alone, it loses its ethical depth. It becomes a market, not a practice. Fromm's view is more demanding and more human. Love is not only about what I receive. It is about who I become in relation to another life. It is about whether my presence increases truth, dignity, growth, and freedom for both people. That means love is not simply a private emotion. It is a human responsibility, and responsibility transforms the meaning of intimacy. Intimacy is not just closeness. It is a relationship in which two people are willing to become more conscious because they are together. They are willing to tell the truth because they are together. They are willing to grow because they are together. They are willing to remain themselves because they are together. That is not always comfortable, but comfort was never the highest purpose of love. Love is not meant to numb your life. It is meant to deepen it. Chapter 9. To love without losing yourself, you must also learn how to be alone. This sounds simple, but it is one of the hardest lessons in Fromm's thought, because many people do not seek love from fullness. They seek it from loneliness, and loneliness can make you vulnerable to almost anything that feels like relief. You may accept less than you deserve because at least someone is there. You may tolerate disrespect because being alone feels worse. You may stay in a relationship that does not honor you because the empty space inside feels too frightening to face. Fromm knew that solitude is not the enemy of love. In fact, the inability to be alone often makes genuine love impossible. Why? Because if you cannot be with yourself, you will use the other person to escape yourself. And then the relationship becomes a distraction from inner life rather than a meeting of lives. Being alone is not the same as being isolated. It is the capacity to sit with your own existence without panic. It is the ability to remain grounded in your own being even when no one is affirming you in that moment. It is the quiet strength that prevents you from begging love from the wrong place. This strength matters because love given from panic is not free. It is pressured, it is anxious. It is often manipulative even when it is sincere. But love that can stand alone before it enters relationship is less desperate and more whole. It says, I do not need to disappear to be with you. I can remain myself and still open my heart. That is a much stronger foundation. And it is one of the deepest gifts Fromm offers us. The reminder that learning to be alone is not the opposite of love. It is one of its conditions. Chapter 10. Perhaps the most radical part of Fromm's vision is that love is learnable. This is powerful because it means you are not doomed by your history. You are not forever trapped by your emotional immaturity. You are not limited to the patterns you inherited. You can learn. You can practice. You can become more capable of love than you were yesterday. This is not instant. It is not glamorous. It does not happen by reading one inspiring sentence and suddenly becoming wise. It happens through repetition, reflection, disappointment, courage, and discipline. It happens when you notice where you are using people instead of meeting them. It happens when you notice where you are seeking comfort instead of truth. It happens when you notice where you are afraid to ask for what is real. It happens when you choose honesty over illusion, even when illusion feels easier. That is why Fromm's message can be so healing. He does not merely diagnose the failure of modern love. He offers a path, a disciplined path, a human path. A path that asks you to become more present, more responsible, more respectful, more aware. And in becoming that person, you do not lose love. You gain the capacity for it. That is the real art. Not clinging, not consuming, not idealizing, not disappearing. Learning how to love in a way that keeps both people alive. Chapter 11. When you love without losing yourself, you stop asking love to do what only your own development can do. Love cannot create your self-worth from nothing. Love cannot replace inner stability. Love cannot make up for self-neglect. Love cannot carry your unlived life forever. Fromm would insist that the mature person must become a participant in their own becoming. That means you take responsibility for your inner world instead of expecting another person to hold it together for you. This is not cold. It is respectful. It honors the other person as a real human being with limits. It honors yourself as someone capable of growth. And it protects love from becoming a substitute for identity. Because if you do not know who you are, you may attach to someone who tells you. If you do not know your own values, you may mirror theirs. If you do not know your own direction, you may orbit theirs. That may feel romantic at first, but it often ends in confusion. To avoid that, you need to become someone who can stand in the world with enough inner gravity that love becomes addition, not survival. This does not mean you should not need others. We are human. We need connection, we need affection, we need belonging. But need is healthiest when it is held by a self that is already learning how to live. That self can give. That self can receive. That self can stay open without dissolving. That self can love without disappearing. And that is where Fromm's wisdom becomes most practical. Not only in theory, in the ordinary daily act of remaining yourself while caring deeply for another. Chapter 12. If this kind of love feels difficult, that is not a sign that it is wrong. It may be a sign that you are being asked to grow beyond familiar dependence. Growth always feels a little like loss at first. You lose old fantasies. You lose old habits. You lose the comfort of blaming someone else for the emptiness you have been carrying. But what you gain is more valuable. You gain clarity. You gain dignity. You gain the ability to love without confusion. You gain a relationship to yourself that is no longer built entirely on the reactions of others. And that changes everything. Because once you are no longer trying to use love to complete you, you can finally experience love as encounter rather than rescue. You can meet the other person as another human being rather than a cure. You can value their presence without demanding that it erase your loneliness. You can be touched by their existence without losing your own. That is the kind of love Fromm believed was worth learning. Not because it is easy, but because it is true. And truth, in the end, is what keeps love from becoming an elegant form of self-destruction. And more. Chapter 13. Love that does not include self-respect becomes self-erasure. This is one of the clearest lessons in Fromm's thought. If you keep giving yourself away in the name of love, you may call it devotion, but your soul feels the truth. It feels the slow loss of edges. It feels the exhaustion of endless accommodation. It feels the quiet resentment that appears when you have made yourself too available to people who do not know how to meet you fully. To love without losing yourself, you must be willing to remain distinct. Distinct does not mean distant. Distinct does not mean detached. Distinct means you are not fused into someone else's needs, moods, or expectations. You do not stop being a person when you love. You do not dissolve into a role. You do not become a vessel for another person's emptiness. Fromm would say that love flourishes when each person is strong enough to remain real. Not armored, real. That realness makes intimacy possible because there is something there to meet. If you vanish, the relationship may continue, but love becomes thin. It may look like harmony. It may feel like loyalty. It may even be praised as sacrifice. But if it continually costs you your center, it is not love in the full sense Fromm intended. It is too expensive. And anything that asks you to abandon your humanity in order to preserve connection is asking too much. Chapter 14. A mature love is never built on blind hunger alone. It is built on the willingness to see the other person clearly, to see yourself clearly, to see what is real instead of what is projected, to see where desire is honest and where it is compensating for pain. This capacity to see is central to Fromm's idea of love because love without knowledge becomes fantasy. Knowledge does not kill love. It deepens it. It removes the false images that keep the bond unstable. It asks harder questions. What am I actually responding to in this person? What have I placed on them that belongs to my own longing? What parts of myself am I trying to recover through this connection? What fears become louder when I am close to them? These questions are not meant to weaken feeling. They are meant to strengthen love by grounding it in reality. Because reality is where love either matures or collapses. The fantasy self can always say, "I love you." The mature self asks whether that love is truthful, respectful, and alive. That is the deeper standard. And it matters because so many people are not starved for affection as much as they are starved for honest connection. The honesty is what makes love usable. The honesty is what makes love safe. The honesty is what makes love sustainable. Without it, love becomes theater. And theater may move you, but it cannot hold your life. Chapter 15. Fromm was deeply aware that modern societies often make love harder, not easier. People are trained to consume, to compare, to replace, to perform, to seek external validation, to believe that value comes from being desired rather than from being genuinely alive. In that environment, love can easily become another market. Who is attractive enough? Who is impressive enough? Who offers enough status? Who helps me feel enough? These questions reveal the corruption of love by ego and social pressure. Because if the relationship is built on image, then the self inside the relationship begins to disappear. You become a curated version of yourself. You manage impressions. You protect your desirability. You hide your vulnerability. You edit your truth. And the more you do that, the less room there is for love as Fromm understood it. Love requires reality. Not branding, not performance, not a carefully managed identity. It requires the courage to be known. That courage is rare because being known is risky. But it is also the only way love becomes more than a transaction between polished surfaces. If you want to love without losing yourself, you have to stop asking whether you are being successfully admired. You have to ask whether you are genuinely present. That question can expose a lot. It can reveal where you have been acting instead of relating. It can reveal where you have been seeking approval instead of contact. It can reveal where you have been more invested in being chosen than in being true. And once you see that, you begin to live differently. Not perfectly. Differently. Chapter 16. Love is not only a feeling between two people. It is a practice of becoming more human. This is the deeper current running through Fromm's work. Love is not simply personal satisfaction or private emotion. It is an act of human growth. It asks you to become more patient, more truthful, more responsible, more capable of care. That means love is not separate from ethics. It is ethical. To love someone well is to refuse to reduce them to your use. It is to honor their individuality. It is to support their flourishing without controlling their path. That is why mature love cannot survive without respect. Respect means you do not try to own what you admire. It means you do not confuse closeness with entitlement. It means you do not turn another person into your emotional property. This kind of respect protects both people. It protects you from dependency. It protects the other person from being consumed. It protects the relationship from becoming a cage. Fromm knew that many people speak about love while practicing possession. But possession is not love. Possession says, I need you to be mine. Love says, I want you to be more fully yourself. That is a profound difference. And if you can live by that difference, you begin to love in a way that does not diminish either life in the relationship. Chapter 17. There is another reason people lose themselves in love. They confuse merging with intimacy. Merging feels powerful. It feels romantic. It feels like total immersion. It can feel like the end of loneliness. But it often comes at a cost. If merging means losing individuality, then what remains is not deep love but emotional fusion. And fusion is unstable because it needs constant reinforcement. It cannot tolerate too much difference. It panics when the other person pulls away. It suffers when the two lives are not identical. It wants sameness where healthy love requires distinction. Fromm offered a better vision. Intimacy does not mean disappearing into one another. It means meeting one another consciously. It means two separate beings choosing contact without losing their shape. This is harder than fusion because it asks for maturity. It asks you to remain yourself when the other person disagrees. It asks you to stay present when you cannot control the outcome. It asks you to love without surrendering your center. That is not less beautiful. It is more beautiful because it is real. If you have ever felt yourself dissolve in the presence of someone you loved, ask whether you were being invited into love or into escape. That question can save you from confusing emotional intoxication with human connection. And when you learn the difference, you become capable of something much stronger than obsession. You become capable of relationship. Chapter 18. A great deal of suffering in love comes from asking another person to do what only your own inner work can accomplish. You ask them to make you feel secure. You ask them to give you worth. You ask them to remove uncertainty. You ask them to heal what was broken long before they arrived. But no human being can sustain that role forever. Eventually, the demand becomes too heavy. Eventually, the relationship bends under the pressure. Eventually, what began as love begins to feel like responsibility for someone else's emotional survival. Fromm would say that this is where many people misunderstand the nature of love. Love is not the solution to all lack. It is the condition that allows two people to meet without using each other to escape their own incompleteness. That requires personal responsibility. You are responsible for your healing, responsible for your boundaries, responsible for your emotional truth, responsible for your growth. This does not make love less important. It makes love more honest. Because when you stop expecting another person to do your inner work, you can actually receive them as they are. You stop asking them to be your cure. You start appreciating what they genuinely offer. And that is the beginning of gratitude instead of dependency. Gratitude is a very different emotional atmosphere. It is less anxious, less grasping, less desperate, more spacious, more alive, and love breathes more easily in it. Chapter 19. Fromm's thinking also reminds us that love requires discipline. This word can sound unromantic to modern ears, but it is essential. Without discipline, love is often just mood. It is reactive, impulsive, short-lived, easily distracted by novelty or dissatisfaction. Discipline gives love form. It means you return attention when it wanders. You listen when it would be easier to assume. You remain present when the relationship feels ordinary. You continue to care when feeling alone is tempting. Discipline is what makes love durable. It is not the enemy of tenderness. It is the structure that tenderness needs in order to last. A person who says they love you but never practices attention is not yet living Fromm's vision of love. A person who says they care but never learns how to respect your reality is not yet practicing love deeply enough. A person who loves only when it is easy is not yet committed to love as an art. This matters because many people want the reward of love without the discipline. They want the warmth without the work, the depth without the practice, the bond without the responsibility. But love is not passive consumption. It is cultivation, and what is cultivated slowly is often what endures longest. That is one of Fromm's quiet gifts. He restores dignity to effort. He tells us that effort in love is not proof that something is wrong. It is proof that something matters. Chapter 20. If you are learning to love without losing yourself, one of the hardest things to accept is that not every feeling should be obeyed. Some feelings are true, some are wounded, some are inherited, some are old, some belong to your present life, some belong to your past. Fromm's work helps us understand that maturity includes discernment. You do not simply follow longing wherever it goes. You ask what longing is asking for. You do not simply follow attraction. You ask whether attraction is aligned with your well-being. You do not simply follow fear. You ask what fear is trying to protect. This is especially important because people often mistake emotional urgency for truth. But urgency is often a sign of unresolved need. An unresolved need can make a relationship feel vital long before it is wise. That is why self-knowledge matters so much. The more you know your own emotional history, the less likely you are to hand your life over to instinct alone. You begin to notice when you are drawn to people because they echo a wound. You begin to notice when you are staying because you fear being alone. You begin to notice when you are calling something love because the alternative is facing emptiness. These are difficult truths. But they are also liberating, because when you can name them, you can no longer be entirely ruled by them. And that is how love becomes less like a trap and more like a path. Chapter 21. There is a special kind of peace that comes from no longer trying to be enough for everyone. This peace is not indifference. It is relief. It is the end of the exhausting performance of becoming whatever someone else needs. It is the end of trying to be lovable by erasing your own edges. It is the end of bargaining with your identity for the sake of acceptance. Fromm would recognize the cost of this performance immediately. He understood how easily people distort themselves in order to be desired, how easily they become marketable selves rather than truthful selves, how easily they trade authenticity for approval. But the price is high. Every time you betray your inner truth to maintain attachment, you move further from the kind of love that could actually nourish you. Because real love cannot thrive in a self that is permanently edited. Real love needs a living person, not a brand. That means your work is not to become universally pleasing. Your work is to become increasingly real, and realness has consequences. Some people will not like it, some will resist it, some will leave. Some will only stay if you become smaller, but if love requires you to become smaller, it is too costly. The right kind of love does not ask for your disappearance, it asks for your presence, and presence is worth more than approval. Chapter 22. The most dangerous form of love is not hatred. It is self-betrayal disguised as devotion. That is the kind of love Fromm warns against in many forms, even when he is not naming it exactly that way. It is the love that keeps giving long after giving becomes self-erasure. It is the love that confuses endurance with virtue. It is the love that stays not because it is true, but because it is afraid. This kind of love often begins with a sincere heart, but sincerity is not enough. A sincere heart can still be misled. A sincere heart can still repeat an old wound. A sincere heart can still call dependence loyalty. That is why wisdom is necessary. Wisdom allows love to be more than feeling. It allows love to include limits. It allows love to say no without collapsing. It allows love to walk away without hatred when the bond no longer honors truth. This is not a betrayal of love. It is a betrayal of illusion. And illusion is often what keeps people suffering long after the real relationship has already failed. To love without losing yourself, you must be willing to disappoint the part of you that wants fantasy more than reality. That part will grieve. It may protest. It may feel the loss intensely. But on the other side of that grief is something far better. A love that does not require you to disappear in order to remain wanted. Chapter 23. Fromm's vision is deeply human because it does not demand perfection from us. It asks for practice. That matters because many people avoid love altogether once they realize how much it asks of them. They decide it is safer to protect themselves, to stay guarded, to become independent in a hardened way. But Fromm is not asking for hardness. He is asking for wholeness. That means you do not close your heart to avoid self-loss. You learn how to keep your heart open without abandoning your inner structure. This is the real challenge. To be open and rooted at the same time. To be tender and clear at the same time. To be generous and discerning at the same time. To be loving and bounded at the same time. That combination is not easy, but it is mature. And maturity in love is what allows the relationship to become a place of growth instead of a place of repetition. If you are learning this now, be patient with yourself. You are not trying to become someone who never needs anything. You are learning how not to make your need the ruler of your life. That is a subtle but crucial distinction. Need can exist. Longing can exist. Desire can exist. But they no longer need to lead. That is how you remain yourself while loving deeply. Chapter 24. The final lesson is perhaps the most important one. Love is not something you receive once and for all. It is something you practice. You practice attention, you practice honesty, you practice patience, you practice care, you practice respect, you practice responsibility, you practice knowledge, you practice staying present when it would be easier to retreat. This is why love is an art. An art is never complete simply because you have decided to feel inspired. It takes repetition. It takes refinement. It takes humility. It takes the willingness to fail and return. The same is true in love. You will misunderstand. You will project. You will want too much. You will fear too much. You will sometimes lose yourself. And then you must learn how to return. Return to truth. Return to your own center. Return to the reality of the other person. Return to the discipline of care. Return to the practice of seeing clearly. That return is the heart of the work. And when you keep returning, love becomes less of an accident and more of a way of life. A life in which you do not vanish to remain connected. A life in which your heart remains open without yourself disappearing. A life in which love does not ask you to become less human in order to be held. Final chapter. If you want to love without losing yourself, begin here. Be honest about your loneliness. Be honest about your projections. Be honest about the ways you have tried to purchase love with self-erasure. Be honest about the parts of you that still confuse possession with care. Be honest about the places where you have mistaken dependency for intimacy. Then begin again, not perfectly, honestly. Learn to be alone without becoming closed. Learn to care without controlling. Learn to give without vanishing. Learn to see the person in front of you instead of the fantasy you hoped they would fulfill. That is the art Fromm was pointing toward, not a romantic fantasy, a human discipline. And if you practice it, love will not make you disappear. It will make you more real. Closing chapter. The art of loving is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming present. It is about learning how to stay open without losing your center, how to care without control, how to give without emptiness, and how to remain a whole person in the presence of another whole person. That is the deepest lesson Fromm leaves us with. Love is not something that happens to the lucky. It is something that grows in those who are willing to practice truth, discipline, patience, and respect. So if you have loved poorly before, that does not mean you cannot love well now. If you have lost yourself in the past, that does not mean you must keep repeating it. You can learn. You can grow. You can return to yourself. And from that place, love becomes something stronger than fantasy. It becomes a way of living that enlarges the soul instead of shrinking it. Love without losing yourself is not distant love. It is mature love. It is love with spine, with warmth, with clarity. It is love that sees, loves, and still lets the other be real. And maybe that is the real beginning. Not when you find someone who completes you, but when you become someone who no longer needs to disappear in order to love.